Ava. It was supposed to be another boring day. Another boring day of guarding this long-haul space freighter that could possibly be at risk to pirate attacks. We were in the middle of charted space, with nothing around us as we slowly made our way to a colony world to drop off supplies and materials for the things that they couldn't make themselves. I was chatting with one of the newest member of the crew, a Terran named Alex. The Terrans were new in the galactic scene, only being known for about a year or two. What they lacked in sophistication of technology, they more than made up for that in paranoia and armor technologies. I suppose that brings me to the first thing that was noticeable about the Terrans: their suits. Looking at one made you think that they had to spend their entire existence in fierce battle with the amount of armor that they wore. It was also a bit strange that no one has ever seen a Terran outside of their armor before. When they came onto the galactic stage, they claimed that they breathed an entirely different element than the rest of the galaxy. I think it was methane, instead of the oxygen that the rest of the galaxy breathes. Our leaders, of course, were skeptical, because that explanation didn't justify the sheer amount of armor that they wore. They then explained that they would rather not risk a potential breach, because they know how dangerous pure methane is when exposed to electrical wiring. That explanation seemed to go over a little better. "So wait," I said, waving my clawed hands through the air. "So you're telling me that Terrans don't have a home world? You must have come from a planet at some point." The armored Terran just moved its shoulders up and down in a gesture that I recognized as their shrugging, indicating both confusion and an unwillingness to probe deeper into the subject at hand. "Well, of course we came from a planet at one point or another, but we've been a fleet-based species for so long that not even our oldest records have anything to say about a home planet." I suppose that makes some sense. After all, there are plenty of fleet-based species out there in the universe, but all of them that we know about at least had a record of what happened to their original planets. And why don't you guys find a nice planet to terraform? I'm sure that it wouldn't be too hard considering how long you all have been spacefaring. He fiddled with his hands a bit as he considered his next words. "It's just never been a priority to command, I guess. And while I'm thinking about it, we can easily get you some methane-aired quarters on the ship if you didn't want to stay in that suit all the time." He continued to fiddle with his hands, looking at the floor. "Well, if you were to do that, then I would have to spend quite some time in an airlock because everyone else on this ship breathes oxygen and stuff." He lifted a finger in another Terran gesture. "And that's a waste of everyone's time. And I can take off the suit, you know that, right? I have a methane mask in my cabin that I use whenever I want to get out of the suit. I just don't get out of it very often." "And why's that? You don't want anyone to see you without the suit on?" "Yeah, there's that. I'm a very shy and private person to begin with, but that's only part of it." He fiddled with his hands some more before finally speaking again. "There was one time that I was doing a spacewalk with a basic suit, one without any armor, and I got hit with some space debris." He paused again, seemingly to collect his thoughts. It ruptured the suit, and I almost died that day." He looked back up to me, the faceplate of his helmet completely unreadable. "After that, I always wear the armored versions, especially when in environments that could easily kill me if I have another suit rupture." I nodded my head in a distinctly Terran gesture that I had learned from Alex. "That makes sense. I'm sorry that I pried so much. I didn't know that there was some history with that." It looked like he was about to respond again when the ship suddenly and violently lurched, causing me to fall, only to be caught by Alex. I thanked him as he helped me back up. The green emergency lights suddenly turned on as we heard the captain over the loudspeaker say, "Attention all crew, we have been ripped out of hyperspace and are currently being boarded by pirates. All non-combat personnel report to your evacuation areas, and all combat personnel report to your stations. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill." Alex and I looked at each other before we both pulled out our respective weapons, a plasma gun for me, and a kinetic rifle for Alex. They're a fleet-based species, so why do they use something that can easily puncture and rupture ship hulls? Come to think of it, a lot of what Alex has told me doesn't really add up. I'll have to ask him about it after we repel these boarders. The engagement was a standard one, with the only things of note happening was that Alex used that kinetic rifle of his to great effect when he saw an enemy in cover that we couldn't get to with our plasma-based weapons. There must have been some kind of targeting computer in that suit of his, because he made shots so quickly and accurately that it seemed like he was more machine than man. We had managed to push back the pirates until they were at their own airlocks. They were clearly in a panic because they didn't aim as they fired wildly at us, most of the shots not even coming within a meter of us. Alex, due to the sheer amount of armor that he was wearing, took the lead of the counterboarding operation, but just as he crossed into the airlock, an explosion rocked the hallway, and he went sailing through the air before finally landing in a heap of metal at the end of the corridor. Air started to be sucked out of the hallway and into the void as the umbilical was severed by the explosion. It didn't take long for the blast doors to seal shut and the room to be filled with oxygen again. I sat there breathing for a minute, just trying to process everything that had happened. Then I remembered. Alex! I sprinted over to where the Terran was lying immobile. My hands shook as I looked at the damage. There was a massive hole in the stomach area of the armor. His suit's breached! Get the emergency methane tank, quickly! I shouted to another member of the security team as I investigated the hole to see if there was any damage besides the torn suit, only to find mechanical parts where a body should be. What's going on? I was so panicked that I barely heard Alex say, Hey, look at me. I don't even know what I'm looking at to begin with. Where's your body? Don't worry, everything's going to be fine. Nothing critical except for the battery was hit. I'm going to be fine. I was on the verge of tears. What are you even talking about? You've got a massive suit breach, and you're saying that you're fine? He sighed. His voice was calm despite the danger that he had just been in. Listen, I know that you have a lot of questions right now and I can't answer them, but I will soon, I promise. A grunt of frustration came before he started speaking again. I can't move, so I'm going to try a few things, all right? Just promise me that you won't freak out. I choked out a sob. Okay, just hang on. Help is on the way. Suddenly, a sharp hiss was heard from Alex, or to be more specific, his head region. The faceplate that originally seemed to be nothing but a solid piece of metal folded and retracted. It did this a few more times, until finally it opened to reveal something that I was never expecting. Nestled in the middle of this metallic head was a tiny chair, and sitting on that tiny chair was a hairless bipedal thing with roughly the same dimensions as Alex, just scaled down by 5 or 6 times. It was wearing a jumpsuit in a garish orange color, with strange markings all over it. I sat there in stunned silence as the person that I had tasked with grabbing the emergency methane tank rushed into view and was about to set the tank down when they stopped in their tracks at the sight of the tiny hairless alien sitting there in what should have been head of Alex. The hairless thing opened its mouth, baring its teeth, and with the voice of Alex said, I suppose you have a lot of questions. Considering the circumstances, that's understandable.
Alex. It's funny that when humans make a plan, that plan eventually goes to crap and you have to improvise. That was the training that I received at the military academy that I went to, but I didn't really have any experience with that piece of information until I had met my first alien. I had only been on this ship as a security guard for a month, but those titanic Xenos asked more questions than the academy could ever prepare me for. I usually managed to avoid the big-ticket items, like why I always wore my suit and where our home planet was. Unfortunately for me, however, I was stuck in a conversation with another member of the security team, Eva, a giant raptor-looking thing, a cocholet, I think. They had feathers sticking out of the light armor that they wore. They fired question after question at me, hitting on all of the things that I was explicitly told not to talk about. Despite the best efforts of the cooling system in this mech, I still felt like there was a river of sweat running down my back the entire time. And why's that? You don't want anyone to see you without the suit on? They asked. Finally, a question that I can answer without being a complete liar. I'm still walking on eggshells, though. Yeah, there's that. I'm a very shy and private person to begin with, but that's only part of it. I manipulated the mech's hands in a very human gesture before speaking. There was one time that I was doing a spacewalk with a basic suit, one without any armor, and I got hit with some space debris. I paused again for dramatic effect. It ruptured the suit, and I almost died that day. I manipulated the mech's head so that I was looking directly at them. The faceplate of this thing really doesn't relay any emotion. I realized for perhaps the 5th time in the last month. After that, I always wear the armored versions, especially when in environments that could easily kill me if I have another suit rupture. Not technically a lie. Ava looked at me with understanding as they nodded their head. That makes sense. I'm sorry that I pried so much. I didn't know that there was some history with that. I was about to respond when the entire ship shook violently, and I had to catch Eva from falling. They thanked me right before the emergency lights flashed on and bathed us in green light instead of the standard red of humanity. Attention all crew, we have been ripped out of hyperspace and are currently being boarded by pirates. All non-combat personnel report to your evacuation areas, and all combat personnel report to your stations. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill, said the captain. I pulled out my rifle and nodded to Ava, who pulled out their own weapon as we both rushed to our assigned part of the ship. The engagement was substandard by human metrics, especially when considering that the pirates barely knew how to fight. Add to that the fact that the alien weapons just didn't have the penetrating power to do much damage to things like bulkheads and the things that we were taking cover behind. My anti-materiel rifle, on the other hand, had none of these issues. These poor Xenos have the unfortunate condition of being made of material. I thought maliciously as my aim was corrected slightly by the onboard computer. We were successful in pushing back the pirates towards the airlocks of the ship. The policy of our alien allies was that as soon as the boarders are repelled, that those that are able are to do a counter-boarding operation to make sure that none of the pirates are taking slaves and things like that. That was one of the few policies that the galactic community had that I actually agreed with. Seeing that I was the most heavily armored person here, I naturally took the job of being the first into the airlock. As I stepped in, I looked down at the floor, only to see a rather large explosive device that was just waiting to be activated. I didn't even have any time to react before I felt the force of the explosion lift the mech off the ground and sailing through the air. It was a really good thing that I was strapped in, otherwise I probably would have been pasted on the inside of the cockpit. I looked around at the diagnostic equipment in the cockpit of the mech, but found that most of the systems were knocked out. "Alert," said the voice of the mech's AI. "The explosion has damaged the primary battery, attempting to reroute power to motor and ocular systems." "Well, that's just great," I said to no one in particular. The river of sweat that I had running down my back came back with a vengeance as I went through the many contingency plans I had. Update. Ocular systems have been restored. And with that, I got a face full of Eva looking at the damaged mech. They were clearly panicking. I had to do something fast. Hey, look at me," I said, keeping my voice as even as I could keep it. "I don't even know what I'm looking at to begin with. Where's your body?" "Don't worry. Everything's going to be fine. Nothing critical except for the battery was hit. I'm going to be fine." I could tell they were on the verge of tears. What are you even talking about? You've got a massive suit breach and you're saying that you're fine?" I sighed. "Listen, I know that you have a lot of questions right now and I can't answer them, but I will soon, I promise." I grunted in frustration as I looked over my options. The motion systems were completely offline. I'll have to talk to the guys over in R&D that their multi-trillion-dollar mech can't even survive an explosion like that. "I can't move, so I'm going to try a few things, all right? Just promise me that you won't freak out." And with that, I started to go through the process of opening the hatch. Ava choked out a sob. "Okay, just hang on. Help is on the way." They really do make these things extremely hard to open. I realized as I continued to go through the process of opening the hatch. I must have pressed the confirm button 5 or 6 times before it opened. The hydraulic hiss was all I heard until I saw the green light of the hallways, and finally Eva themselves. They looked shocked beyond comprehension. I saw another figure, this one looking like an oversized turkey, come into view holding a canister of what I assumed was methane. They too froze and stared in confusion. "It's the first time meeting them outside of the mech, so I guess I'll put my best foot forward," the optimistic side of my brain said. So, I smiled. "I suppose you have a lot of questions, considering the circumstances. That's understandable." Ava opened and closed their mouth a couple of times before finally speaking. What's going on? Is that you, Alex?" I flashed another smile. "In the flesh!" I cleared my throat before continuing. "You clearly have questions, so ask away." What are you? How are you so small? And what is this?" they said, gesturing to the mech. I opened my mouth to respond, but was cut off by Ava's communicator going off. "Ava, I've gotten word that Alex's suit was breached. What's his status?" "We can't have the only Terran on the crew being killed. They'll never let us have another," came the urgent voice of the captain. I remembered that Terrans had a reputation of being rare and extremely useful. They turned their communicator on. They flashed a look at me. I gave a thumbs up. "He's fine, but I think that there's something that you should know." "And what's that?" The urgency got more intense. "Well, and without another word, Ava turned on the camera function of the communicator and pointed it at me. I smiled again and gave a wave. The captain sat in silence for a few moments. "Ava, what am I looking at right now?" That's Alex, ma'am," they stuttered out. More silence. "What do you mean, that's Alex?" I decided to speak up. "What Ava means, ma'am, is that I'm Alex. Simple as that." More silence. "Both of you report to the bridge immediately and get ready to do some explaining." "Yes, ma'am," we both said, and with that, the conversation was over. We looked at each other for a moment before I finally spoke up. "Well, what are we waiting for? Let's get going." The look of confusion got deeper. "How are you going to get there? You can't exactly walk." I pondered this for a moment before speaking. "Yeah, it would probably take me way too long to get there, so how about you carry me?" "What? Carry you?" I nodded. They started to reach for me with one of their clawed hands with the clear intent to grab me. "Wait! Stop!" I shouted, causing Ava to jerk their hand back from me. "If you were to pick me up like that, then you'd easily kill me just from the pressure alone." A look of fear flashed across their face. "Well, how am I supposed to get you to the captain, then?" "Either you can carry the mech around or you could hold out your hand like this," I said, as I demonstrated the motion, creating a gentle slope with my arm. Ava cautiously held out their arm, and I only hesitated for a moment before finally clambering up the arm, using feathers and armor alike to get a foothold until I was sitting comfortably on their shoulder. Ava had to suppress a shudder many times until I finally settled. "How are you so good at climbing?" they asked, sharp teeth flashing only a few feet away from me. I gave a little chuckle. "We evolved from animals that were really good at climbing, and we never really lost it. It comes in handy when you live on an alien ship 7 or 8 times bigger than what you're used to, I will admit." Ava didn't have a response to that, so they stood up and began walking to the elevators. I glanced back at the now ruined mech suit sitting in the hallway and suppressed a shudder of my own. Good or bad, everything's different now. It's up to us to adapt to the change.